If you've been following along here on Tales from My Spinner Rack for the past year or so, you know my normal topics concern comic books published by DC and Marvel, mainly in the Silver Age of comics. But my recent visit to San Diego Comic-Con 2024, my favorite show in years, by the way, on a number of different levels, made me think back to my final normal year as an employee of the world-famous event, one that saw me edit and design the final printed souvenir book for the show. The year was 2019, Comic-Con's 50th anniversary, and I was about to help bring about the most monumental cover in Comic-Con's history. This is the story of that cover and how it came to be. Welcome back to Tales from My Spinner Rack. I'm Gary Sassaman, the former Director of Programming and Publications for Comic-Con International San Diego. This is episode 12 of my ongoing series of videos looking back at the comics I loved while growing up in the 1960s and 70s. Only it's not. This time, we're going to spin away from our traditional look at the books on my spinner rack and present, with a little change of background scenery, something akin to what that merry little band of learned and beloved Western philosophers once said in the mid-20th century. And now for something completely different. This is the behind-the-scenes tale of Jim Lee's Comic-Con 2019 souvenir book cover. From the initial idea, to Jim's sketch and pencils, to Scott Williams's inks, to Alex Sinclair's color, and to that final printed cover with type designed by yours truly. As you probably heard in my introduction just seconds ago, I was a senior manager at San Diego Comic-Con from 2000 until 2021. For the first 8 years or so, I was director of programming, scheduling all the panels and events at the show, including sister shows WonderCon and APE, the Alternative Press Expo. That's me introducing one of my very first events in 2000, almost a quarter of a century ago. Thank God I was such a snappy dresser. In 2007, I made a sideways move in the company into the publication end of things, which at that point in time included 7 separate books per year, including 3 program or souvenir books for Comic-Con, WonderCon, and APE, and 3 promotional magazines that were alternately called Update, Comic-Con Magazine, and Comic-Con Annual. The latter 3 were full-color magazines with 48 or more pages, published 3 times per year, except for Comic-Con Annual, which was once a year. And by the way, no skunks were harmed in the creation of that Comic-Con Annual cover with Robert Kirkman in 2011. These were mailed out for free, I might add, to everyone on Comic-Con's mailing list, close to 250,000 copies, and also distributed to select comic shops by Diamond and available locally in San Diego and San Francisco, the latter being the home city for both WonderCon and APE at the time. But the big project each year for me was the Comic-Con souvenir book, the free publication that was given out to each and every attendee at the show. It had a print run of 130,000 copies each year, and at its biggest, it topped out at 280 pages. It was a huge undertaking every year, a gigantic jigsaw puzzle that was all blue sky and green ocean, and took usually around 9 months to put together, from the initial idea stage to the printed page. Hey, that rhymed. From 2007 through 2020, I edited 14 souvenir books in a row for Comic-Con, with covers featuring just about everything, including Star Wars' 30th anniversary in 2007, with art by Adam Hughes, the Legion of Superheroes' 50th in 2008 by Alex Ross, done originally as, I think, a print for the Warner Brothers store. You remember the WB store, don't you? Comic-Con's 40th anniversary in 2009 by Rick Geary, DC's 75th in 2010 by Ivan Rice and Joe Prado, DC's New 52 Justice League in 2011 by Jim Lee, the Marvel Age of Comics 50th in 2012 by John Romita Jr. and Klaus Janson, the Sandman's 25th in 2013 by Dave McKean, the 75th anniversaries of Batman, again by Jim Lee in 2014, Will Eisner's The Spirit by Michael Cho in 2015, and Wonder Woman by Babs Tarr in 2016. The 100th birthday celebration of Jack King Kirby by Bruce Timm in 2017, and the 10th anniversary of a great deal of Kirby's creations translated into another medium, the Marvel Cinematic Universe in 2018 by Matt Taylor. And, oh yeah, This video's topic of discussion, the 2019 cover celebrating 50 years of Comic-Con. Editing and designing the souvenir books is the one thing I miss most about working for Comic-Con. I retired in 2021 after one last book in 2020 with a cover by William Stout celebrating the 100th birthday of Ray Bradbury. Here's Bill's final cover alongside his black and white sketch and color comp. The book was created as an online downloadable PDF, not printed, and I realized then how much I missed the satisfaction of getting the first printed copies. No matter how good you are at gauging what something looks like on your computer screen, the thrill of getting to hold it in your hands as a printed piece is undeniable. Without that jolt of accomplishment, the job held very little enjoyment for me. What can I say? I'm not only a print guy, I'm also a selfish bastard. Since 2019 was the 50th anniversary of the event, started in 1970 at the basement of the U.S. Grand Hotel in downtown San Diego, the decision was made that this particular souvenir book would be a history of Comic-Con, something we had done once, well, more than once, before, especially with the 40th anniversary. In 2009, Comic-Con had co-published with Chronicle Books an illustrated history of the show with over 600 images, including photos and artwork. It's the only official history of the event that utilizes material from the Comic-Con archives. The souvenir book that year acted as a companion volume featuring year-by-year coverage of the event, utilizing images not used in the Chronicle book. Rick Geary, the creator of the show's famed toucan mascot, provided the covers for both the souvenir book and the events guide that year, the latter of which included the complete schedule, maps, and other useful information for the show. And even though I didn't know it yet, 2019 was to be my last printed Comic-Con souvenir book. For this one, I undertook more than I ever did before, including the majority of the writing. I divided Comic-Con up into 5 decades: 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and 2010s, with 2-page spreads for each year in each decade, featuring the major events and special guests that were part of the show. The book also included personal memories from attendees, professionals, and Comic-Con staff and volunteers. I asked Eisner Award-winning comics historian Bill Shelley to write the history of the event. I wanted an unbiased outsider to write about the show, someone who didn't have his own agenda and would write an honest history. Bill was the recognized expert on comics fandom, and he was coming off 2 of his best books, biographies of Mad creator Harvey Kurtzman and magazine publisher James Warren, both published by Fantagraphics. He did an amazing job on the article, but sadly, it was the last major piece he did. The souvenir book was published in July 2019. Bill died suddenly after a short illness in September. So the book's contents were set. The only question now was who would draw the cover. I knew from the start that it had to be a major piece by a major artist, someone with a long history with Comic-Con. I decided, with the approval of my boss, Executive Director Faye Desmond, that we should do a wraparound cover, eliminating the traditional ad space on the back cover of the book. The last time a wraparound cover had happened was 1975, with Will Eisner's creation The Spirit lounging around the El Cortez Hotel's pool. And even that wasn't a full wraparound. Comic-Con co-founder Shel Dorf included a kind of mission statement on 1/3 of the back. The process for figuring out the cover was always the first step in the production of the book each year, because it often required publisher approval for both subject matter, the characters we wanted to use, and the artist involved, not to mention the long amount of lead time necessary for an artist to create the actual cover. There were a number of possibilities when it came to artists from the Comic-Con family. Sergio Aragones had done the tremendous wraparound cover for the 40th anniversary book co-published by Chronicle in 2009. Rick Geary certainly was a longtime member of the Comic-Con family, and he would go on to produce numerous covers for the event, including this piece of art for the 2019 Events Guide cover, and also has done the covers since the show came back post-pandemic. Sadly, Comic-Con is now down to only one printed publication each year, a hybrid events guide / quick guide, but they still do an online PDF souvenir book. I had worked with a number of great artists on various covers for Comic-Con, WonderCon, and Ape, which Comic-Con had given back to its founder in 2015, sad to say. But one stood out as the obvious choice. Jim Lee. I contacted Jim and asked if he would be willing to do the 50th anniversary Souvenir Book cover, and he said he would be honored to do so. He was going to be a guest at WonderCon 2019, and we arranged to get together at that show to discuss the cover. At WonderCon, I quickly learned that you don't go anywhere fast with Jim at a comics convention. Everybody loves Jim and wants to stop and talk to him or have him sign something or just say hi. We eventually settled down in an outdoor area at the Anaheim Convention Center and talked about ideas for the cover, none of which came to fruition. One of them involves some kind of old-fashioned pirate treasure map centered around San Diego. I gave Jim an 11 by 17-inch piece of paper with the dimensions of the finished wraparound cover roughed in. That was a mistake that would come back to haunt me. I had already worked with Jim on both WonderCon and Comic-Con covers. In 2011, DC asked us if we wanted a brand new, unpublished cover for the New 52 launch of Justice League, and we, of course, jumped at the chance. Jim had also done an original WonderCon program book cover for us, featuring Superman for the character's 75th anniversary in 2013. And he had graciously given us a black and white Batman commission he had done, pencils and inks, for the cover of Comic-Con's 2014 Souvenir Book, which Alex Sinclair beautifully colored. Beyond that, Jim was one of superhero comics' most popular artists for close to 30 years, in addition to being DC Comics co-publisher and chief creative officer at the time. He was also pretty much a constant presence at Comic-Con and WonderCon each year, so getting him to do the 50th anniversary cover was definitely a win-win for both the event and its attendees. Almost a month passed once we had met at WonderCon, and I emailed Jim to ask him if he was still interested. By now, it was almost May 2019, and I had a deadline for the book to be at the printer in early June, and to be honest, I was really late nailing down the cover this time out. We printed the Souvenir Book in Canada, and in order to have such a large print run of a big book, 280 pages, with a 130,000 copy print run, printed and bound and shipped to San Diego in time for the show, the lead time was about 6 weeks. Even with that rather expansive time span, any hiccup in the printing or shipping of the book would royally screw us. Jim said he was definitely still interested and asked what I had in mind for the cover. I told him something similar to Sergio's 40th anniversary cover, maybe a bunch of cosplayers in made-up costumes in front of the San Diego Convention Center. Nothing recognizable costume-wise. And to that admittedly lame idea of mine, Jim said, "Nobody wants to see me draw that." Jim wanted to bring in his longtime collaborators, inker Scott Williams and colorist Alex Sinclair, for what would undoubtedly become an all-hands-on-deck cover for the ages. I had worked with both Scott and Alex before. Both of them were longtime San Diego area residents and exhibited for years in Artist Alley at both Comic-Con and WonderCon, so they too were like part of the extended Comic-Con family. What Jim then pitched to me blew my mind, mainly because it was amazing, and partly because I was deathly afraid of it, since it would involve getting numerous approvals from various artists and publishers. But as they say, whomever they are, no guts, no glory. Jim wanted to draw characters he wasn't known for drawing, a lot of characters. When I balked at the amount of approvals we'd have to get, Jim said, "Don't worry about that, I'll help you with it." The cover would include numerous characters from numerous creators and publishing companies. It would be the first and probably the only time a gigantic team-up like this would ever happen. And it all happened because of Jim. Jim asked me who I wanted to see on the cover, and fortunately my wish list was filled with characters he wanted to draw. DC was a no-brainer. We picked the big three, the company's famous trinity of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. For Marvel, I wanted their big MCU movie characters of the moment, Spider-Man, Black Panther, and Captain Marvel. I suggested Spawn and The Walking Dead's Michonne from Image Comics and Skybound, respectively, and Hellboy from Dark Horse Comics, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from Nickelodeon, published by IDW. We both agreed on this lineup, and it was all off to the races with approvals. We agreed to divvy them up, with Jim asking Marvel for permission to use their characters and Todd McFarlane for Spawn, while I handled the rest. We already had DC's permission with Jim on board as the artist. Everyone enthusiastically signed off on the cover with no problems, so my biggest fear went unrealized, but we still had a complicated approval process to get through. A few days later, Jim's first sketch arrived. He added in the familiar vaulting lobby of the San Diego Convention Center as the backdrop for the characters, all of them flying toward the viewer in a frenzy of action. He also sent along a version with all the characters clearly identified. Jim's layout quickly became his very tight pencils, which were above and beyond what I expected. I loved all the nuances in this piece, from his heroic take on each character to the details of the convention center lobby and the crowds below. He also added the logo signs, which are overhead throughout the convention center. It was a great, natural way to incorporate the Comic-Con logo on this 50th anniversary cover. Next up was the inking phase with Scott Williams, followed by the coloring phase by Alex Sinclair. I think the thing about this trio who worked together so often was that they knew exactly how each other thought. They were like a hive mind when it came to the creation of a piece, even a gigantic one like this. Scott's inks pulled everything together and went off to Alex for coloring. I remember approvals from everyone involved included all three stages: pencils, inks, and colors. Only one person objected to their character's costume being off-model, and a minor adjustment was made. Alex did an amazing job in coloring this behemoth piece in a very short window, and finally it was sent to me in its finished form. I had completed the rest of the book and had sent it to the printer, who was just waiting to print the cover so they could bind the book and ship it. I took a little weekend getaway for my birthday, and when I got up on Monday, June 9th, and checked my work email, the link to the finished colored cover was there from Alex Sinclair. Everyone had approved the final color art. My favorite comment came from Hellboy creator Mike Mignola, who was out of the country at the time but wrote back, "I can't see this on my phone, but as long as Hellboy is red, I'm good." I flew home to San Diego later that day and couldn't wait to dive back in on the book, partly because I wanted to see how the cover looked, but mainly because my printer rep was breathing down my neck with constant pleas of, "Where's the cover? We need the cover." As soon as I got home, I opened up my InDesign document and placed the cover art. And it was the wrong size. Jim had gone off that damn piece of 11 by 17-inch paper I had given him months earlier at WonderCon, and not the printer's dimensions I had sent him since. I had about a 2.5-inch gap to fill. I emailed everyone, and it was Alex Sinclair who quickly replied, saying, "Why don't you just add some type?" I said that I would try that, but I wanted Michelangelo's knee to overlap the type box to give it some depth, and Alex promptly sent me the cutout knee to add on a layer above the box. I mocked up the cover and sent a JPEG back to Jim, Scott, and Alex, and I got a brand new email from Jim with a subject line reading, "Starting a new thread," which I took to be his way of saying to me, "Boy, you're in trouble now." Instead, he complimented me on the solution to the size problem, and it started a new email thread since we were at like 103 emails stacked in one giant one that had to be scrolled through to the bottom each time someone replied. And so the cover was done. It was sent to the printer, and all was well with the world, or at least with US and Canada. We revealed the cover on the Comic-Con website a few weeks before the event, and a day after I noticed I started getting a lot of likes on my Instagram account, where I had also posted images of both the front and back covers of the book. I couldn't quite figure out what was going on until I realized Jim had called me out on both his Twitter and Instagram accounts, along with Scott Williams and Alex Sinclair for their much appreciated contributions, with this message: "Special kudos to Gary Sassaman at GG92118 for being the absolute center of this project and making sure it could be all that we hoped it would be when we first discussed this crazy idea for a Comic-Con cover." That was certainly one of the more gratifying moments of my Comic-Con career, to be honest. I just want to talk about this cover a little more because there are a number of things that I love about it. This is just the finished cover art we're looking at, or color art we're looking at, not the completed cover with the type on it. The spine of the book came in right around here, so that's the dividing point between the back cover on the left and the front cover on the right. I was especially impressed with the way Jim grouped the heroes, but one thing that really stood out for me was the strong diagonal flow of them. Superman and Spider-Man have their own thing going on the back cover. On the front cover, all the heroes head down diagonally from Spawn to the Black Panther. And if you look closely, even the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have their own little diagonal grouping going on. I also love the fact that Superman and Spider-Man pretty much dominate that back cover, as both the big guns from DC and Marvel. They deserve their own moment together. And every time I look at this cover, I think of one thing and one thing only. Yep, It kind of warms the heart of this old comic book collector. I'd pay good money for a Jim Lee illustrated sequel, wouldn't you? Treasury-sized, of course. Jim very graciously gave the original art for this piece to the new Comic-Con Museum, and we featured it in the 2019 Art of Comic-Con 50 show that I curated during Comic-Con that year. I personally think it's the rarest piece of all Jim Lee original art. Where else can you see his versions of all these characters side by side? This piece was displayed alongside Jim's other covers for Comic-Con, including his 2014 Batman 75th Anniversary cover and a mural-sized version of the 2011 New 52 Justice League cover at the back of the gallery, the perfect spot for a selfie. Jim also went the extra mile of participating in a special interview and Q&A session with me for the members of the various Comic-Con graphic novel book clubs. This was a private event at Comic-Con 2019 on Saturday evening, and Jim very patiently answered questions. He was friendly and open throughout the program and signed stuff for the book club members after the Q&A portion, until his family appeared at the back of the room, reminding him that they had dinner reservations, and hey, Jim was hungry. I am intensely proud of this book, but little did I know at the time that it would be my last printed one. I had been making noise about retiring in 2020 for about 5 years. The pandemic happened that year, and the world suddenly seemed to be a very uncertain place. So I hung on at work for an extra year, but I knew it was my time to go for a number of different reasons. In retrospect, I was very glad that I didn't know 2019 was my last printed book and in-person Comic-Con as a staff member. It was much easier to tell everyone 2 years later that I had retired from the organization I had called home for over 20 years and not have to do it in person, but instead from the safe distance of email. Full disclosure, I'm an emotional slob, and I made a lot of friends over the years through my work at Comic-Con. That 2019 Souvenir Book was meant to be a capstone for the event. I just didn't know at the time that it would be one for me, too. You can still find copies of the 2019 Souvenir Book on eBay for a reasonable price, and maybe even in some San Diego area comic shops. I like to think it's worth seeking out and that it still stands up as an art-filled history of the event, not to mention that one-of-a-kind cover, something that is very unlikely to ever be seen again, illustrated by one of comics' all-time greats at the top of his game. I'm very proud of my time with Comic-Con, especially the publications that I edited and designed and helped write. I got to meet a lot of artists whose work I admired and even work with some of the greats, including Jim Lee. 5 years later, this book still stands out as a personal high for me. The end. There are 11 other full-length Tales from My Spinner Rack episodes here on YouTube, featuring everything from the great Marvel annuals of the 1960s to some of my favorite comic books of DC's Go-Go Checks era, with, of course, more to come. Please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more Tales from My Spinner Rack videos here on YouTube. Visit my blog for the first version of Tales from My Spinner Rack at www.innocent-bystander.com. It features nostalgic essays on the comics I grew up loving in the 1960s and 70s. Each post has tons of scanned artwork, including covers, story pages, and even some original art. Just click on any post on the homepage and then on Tales from My Spinner Rack in the category list at the top of the right-hand column on any page to access all my posts. That's www.innocent-bystander.com. Follow me on Instagram at Tales from My Spinner Rack, it's all one word, or if you want to stalk me personally, follow me at GG92118. I don't do X, I don't do Threads, there is no official Tales from My Spinner Rack Facebook page, and all my TikTok stuff is me sobbing uncontrollably while I watch Hallmark Channel Christmas movies year-round. Let me know in the comments below if you like this type of content or if you prefer my usual stuff. I'll be back soon with another deep dive into the comics I loved growing up in the 1960s and 70s. Thanks for watching. Good night.